Hey guys, you wake up before dawn, and your tongue is already stuck to the roof of your mouth. The water ration you're clutching, it has to last 3 more days. The guide who promised to lead you safely across the Sahara, he disappeared in the night, taking half your supplies with him. This isn't a hypothetical scenario. This was the daily reality for thousands of ancient traders who attempted the trans-Saharan crossing. Tonight, you'll discover why this journey was less exotic adventure and more organized suicide, and why people kept attempting it anyway. But before you get really comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're enjoying what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you over there. Now dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've probably seen the romantic version. Golden caravans gliding across pristine dunes, exotic traders in flowing robes, camels adorned with colorful textiles moving in perfect formation toward distant oases. The merchants look wise and weathered, but ultimately triumphant. The desert looks challenging but manageable, and everyone arrives at their destination with great stories and greater profits. This is the Hollywood version of trans-Saharan trade, the one that ignores the brutal mathematics of desert survival. It's the version where camels never collapse from dehydration, where water supplies never run out, and where the biggest concern is whether your turban matches your robes. Spoiler alert. None of this happened. The reality waiting for you is a slow-motion disaster where every decision becomes a calculation between profit and death. Your caravan isn't a majestic procession. It's a desperate convoy of walking corpses, each person carrying just enough water to maybe survive 3 days if everything goes perfectly. And nothing goes perfectly in the Sahara. Ever. Those exotic flowing robes? They're practical necessities to prevent your skin from literally cooking off your bones in temperatures that regularly hit 130 degrees. The fabric isn't chosen for color coordination. It's selected based on how well it reflects heat while covering every inch of exposed flesh. Vanity is a luxury that kills people in the desert. The colorful textiles adorning the camels in romantic depictions? They're covering wounds, sores, and the constant bleeding from sand-abraded skin. Your camel isn't decorated. It's bandaged. The bright patterns hide the fact that your primary means of transportation is slowly falling apart, just like everything else in your caravan. The merchants aren't romantic adventurers seeking exotic experiences and cultural exchange. They're calculating survivors who've learned that sentiment kills faster than thirst. Every decision gets filtered through a simple question. Does this increase or decrease my chances of dying today? Romance doesn't factor into desert survival equations. But here's the thing. People kept doing it anyway. Not because they were brave or adventurous, but because the potential profits were so enormous that they justified risking almost certain death. This wasn't wanderlust dressed up as commerce. This was economic desperation dressed up as commerce. And the desert didn't care about your motivations. What you're about to experience is the systematic destruction of every romantic notion about desert travel. You'll discover why successful trans-Saharan traders weren't the ones with the best equipment or the most experience. They were simply the ones who got lucky enough times in a row to tell their stories. The truth is that crossing the Sahara was less exotic adventure and more organized suicide with a profit margin. The desert treated everyone equally, with complete indifference to their survival. Your water runs out at the same rate regardless of how noble your intentions are, and dehydration kills idealists just as efficiently as it kills cynics. The rituals that follow can only be described as elaborate funeral preparations disguised as travel planning. The pre-departure process wasn't about packing for an adventure. It was about accepting that you probably wouldn't return home to tell anyone about it. Every preparation decision becomes a grim calculation of what matters more: comfort or survival, speed or safety. You're not selecting a travel wardrobe. You're choosing burial shrouds that might keep you alive long enough to use them for their intended purpose. the flowing robes everyone associates with desert romance? They're practical necessities designed to prevent your skin from literally cooking off your bones when the sand reaches temperatures over 110 degrees. The water calculations are brutal mathematics that would make an accountant weep. Caravans traveled roughly 20 miles per day over 70 days, which meant packing at least 2 months of water rations at roughly 1 gallon per person per day. Smart traders scheduled departure during cooler months between October and March, then packed 60 days worth of provisions for a 70-day journey and prayed they wouldn't need supplies for 80. Spoiler alert. Something always goes wrong in the Sahara. Equipment breaks, people get sick, sandstorms blow you off course, and bandits decide your water looks more appealing than your gold. Your camel selection isn't about finding the prettiest animal with the most decorative tassels. It's about identifying which beast is least likely to collapse and die with all your precious water still strapped to its back. You're looking for the camel equivalent of a reliable truck. Not fast, not beautiful, but capable of carrying up to 1,200 pounds of cargo without dropping dead from heat exhaustion. The desert doesn't care if your camel matches your aesthetic vision. The route planning sessions resemble military strategy meetings, complete with discussions of harsh realities. Leaders weighed who might slow them down. Harsh choices born of desperation, not cruelty. These conversations happen matter-of-factly, like discussing the weather, because survival mathematics don't accommodate sentiment. You spend considerable time arranging your merchandise, your saddlery, and all your supplies with the methodical precision of someone preparing for surgery. At the last moment, you fill your gerba, the water containers made of goatskins that will become more valuable than gold once you enter the desert. The departure ceremony includes drum beats and fluttering standards, but the atmosphere feels more like a wake than a celebration. Everyone knows the statistics. Everyone understands that this convoy represents a systematic preparation for mass casualties, with the slim hope that some might survive to make the journey profitable. By the time you're ready to depart, you've essentially written your will, said your goodbyes, and accepted that the desert considers you already dead. The preparation process is complete, and now you get to discover whether your calculations were sufficient or whether you've just organized your own elaborate funeral procession that will teach you exactly what desperation tastes like. The first lesson in desert survival arrives 20 days into the crossing, when you discover that thirst isn't just wanting water, it's your body systematically shutting down while your mind watches helplessly. The romanticized notion of desert thirst completely fails to capture the visceral horror of cellular dehydration. Your tongue isn't just dry. It's swollen, cracked, and feels like a piece of leather someone forgot to oil, stuck permanently to the roof of your mouth. Your saliva has become a thick, stringy paste, and swallowing feels like forcing down broken glass. The water rationing isn't just discipline, it's psychological torture, knowing that the liquid in your gourd represents the difference between sanity and madness. You measure each sip like a miser counting coins, holding the water in your mouth longer than necessary because swallowing means it's gone. You start dreaming about water, but not refreshing streams or cool lakes. You dream about the specific weight of a full water skin against your hip, the exact sound water makes when it hits the back of your parched throat, the way moisture feels when it actually reaches your stomach, instead of being absorbed by your desiccated mouth before it gets there. These aren't pleasant dreams, they're torture sessions that leave you more dehydrated when you wake up. Your body begins cannibalizing muscle to draw out water, and you can actually taste your own cellular breakdown. There's a metallic flavor that develops when your kidneys work overtime to conserve every drop of fluid. Your urine becomes dark amber, then brown, then stops flowing entirely when dehydration reaches extreme levels. The hallucinations start small, thinking you hear water dripping somewhere in the distance, seeing wet spots on dry sand that vanish when you get closer. But they grow until you're chasing mirages that your rational mind knows aren't there. The worst part isn't that you see these illusions. It's that part of your brain genuinely believes they're real. creating internal arguments between logic and desperation that drain more energy than walking. Consider Ibn Battuta's account of losing 3 days' worth of water rations on the Tagaza route, a disaster that transformed his caravan from confident traders into desperate survivors calculating whether they had enough liquid left to reach the next well. This wasn't theoretical mathematics. This was the difference between returning home with stories or becoming another cautionary tale buried in the sand. Your lips crack and bleed, but there's no saliva to clean the wounds. The blood dries immediately in the desert air, creating painful scabs that split again every time you try to speak. Talking becomes agony, so conversations dwindle to essential communications only. The social fabric of your caravan dissolves along with everyone's bodily fluids. When you finally do get your daily water ration, you don't drink it. You worship it. You hold the container with both hands, studying the liquid like it contains the meaning of life, because in the desert, it does. You measure each drop against how many hours of consciousness it might buy you, whether it's worth the brief pleasure of taste versus the extended agony of knowing it's gone. This level of thirst transforms water from a basic necessity into something more precious than gold, more vital than breath itself. Every swallow becomes a religious experience. Every drop a small miracle that postpones the inevitable for another few hours. But even with perfect water discipline, you still need to know where you're going. And that's where things get interesting. You wake up one morning to discover that the landscape looks exactly like yesterday's landscape, and the day before that, and every day since you entered this sandy hell. The dunes roll endlessly in every direction, each one indistinguishable from the last, creating a monotonous panorama that would drive a cartographer to drink. Desert navigation isn't about following roads or landmarks. It's about reading invisible signs in an environment specifically designed to kill anyone who gets lost. The guide everyone's depending on is just as lost as you are, but admitting it would cause panic that kills faster than dehydration. So he maintains an air of confident authority while secretly studying the same featureless horizon you're all staring at, hoping someone will recognize something, anything, that looks familiar. The psychological pressure is crushing because everyone knows that one wrong turn doesn't just mean delay. It means everyone dies, and it's probably your fault for trusting a man who's been making educated guesses for the past week. Your navigation tools are pathetic by any reasonable standard. The stars shift nightly, wind patterns change without warning, and those ancient camel tracks you're following might lead to water, or they might lead to the bleached bones of the last caravan that followed them with similar optimism. Experienced Berber guides follow Polaris and familiar constellations, but cloud cover means death. Period. No stars, no navigation, no survival. You learn to read camel dung like a survival manual, looking for fresh droppings that indicate other travelers passed this way recently. Fresh droppings mean hope. Someone else might know where they're going. Old droppings mean you're following ghosts. The absence of droppings means you're pioneering new territory, which sounds adventurous until you realize it probably means you're walking toward nothing. The Tuareg guides, when you can afford them, rely on an intimate knowledge of the desert that takes lifetimes to develop. They read wind patterns, sand formations, and subtle changes in terrain that are invisible to outsiders. But even their expertise sometimes fails when sandstorms rearrange the landscape overnight, erasing familiar landmarks and creating new ones that look deceptively familiar. The desert becomes a constantly changing maze with no exit, reshaping itself while you sleep. Sand dunes shift like living things, migrating across the landscape and obliterating yesterday's reference points. That distinctive rock formation you used as a landmark, it's now buried under 30 feet of sand, or it was never there at all, and you imagined it during a dehydration-induced hallucination. The desert plays tricks on desperate minds, creating false memories of navigation markers that never existed. Your compass, if you have one, becomes unreliable near iron ore deposits. The sun provides general direction but offers no help when sandstorms block it for days. You start recognizing the specific shapes of sand grains, the particular way wind sounds when it hits certain rock formations, the subtle color variations in sand that might indicate underground water sources. These aren't skills you wanted to develop. They're desperate survival adaptations. The brutal mathematics of navigation become clear quickly. Caravans depend on reaching oases spaced days apart, and missing one means disaster. Small errors compound exponentially, and by the time you realize you're lost, correction becomes impossible with remaining supplies. Navigation becomes less about knowing where you're going, and more about accepting that you're probably lost while desperately hoping your guide is better at hiding panic than you are. The successful crossings you hear about in stories weren't triumphs of superior navigation skills. They were accidents of good fortune, combined with adequate preparation and guides who happened to guess correctly more often than they guessed wrong. In the desert, every navigation error is a step toward oblivion. But sometimes, after weeks of wandering, you finally see something that looks like salvation. That shimmer resolves into palm trees, actual green vegetation, and the impossible reflection of real water catching sunlight. Your brain, operating on survival mode for so long it's forgotten how to process good news, takes several minutes to accept this isn't another hallucination. The oasis looks exactly like salvation should look, which becomes your first clue that something is probably wrong. Oases represent salvation in popular imagination, but in reality they're often elaborate traps that kill as many travelers as they save. The water you've been dreaming about might be contaminated with diseases that transform your digestive system into a bacterial battlefield. As the geographer Yaqut al-Hamawi documented, oasis water could be fetid and lethal, causing intestinal problems that made entire journeys memorable for all the wrong reasons. Your first instinct is to drink deeply and immediately, but experienced travelers know that contaminated water can kill you faster than thirst. Just more unpleasantly. The oasis isn't empty. It's controlled by local nomads and pastoralists who view desperate caravans as business opportunities, demanding high tribute for access to wells. These aren't charity operations run by desert philanthropists. They're commercial enterprises where your desperation becomes their profit margin, and they've had plenty of practice calculating exactly how much a dying person will pay for water. The negotiation process resembles extortion more than commerce. You discover that many oases are seasonal, and what looked like salvation from a distance might be a dried-up depression filled with nothing but salt and bones of previous visitors. Caravans often recalled wells that had been abandoned or silted over due to lack of maintenance by nomadic guides, creating false hope that breaks minds faster than physical hardship. The psychological torture of reaching an oasis, only to find it unusable, creates a special kind of despair that transforms hope into something more dangerous than realistic pessimism. The water itself might taste like paradise, but it could be the source of diseases that make your entire journey a memory you'd rather forget. What should be life-giving liquid becomes a potential death sentence, making the oasis a trap where the cure proves worse than the original problem. The thing you desperately needed to survive could kill you more unpleasantly than thirst itself. Even if the water is clean, the cost of resources can be crippling. Your wealth, and potentially your life, are at risk the moment you admit you need what they're selling. The control of oases provides leverage over trade, creating situations where reaching water doesn't guarantee survival. It just presents new ways to die that you hadn't considered before. The cruel irony is that finding an oasis often marks the moment when hope becomes more dangerous than despair. You've survived the desert's honest brutality, only to encounter its more sophisticated cruelties, administered by people who've learned to profit from desperation. But even if you successfully navigate the politics of water access, you still face calculations that reduce everything, including human life, to simple mathematics. When your fellow traveler collapses from dysentery, you face a calculation that reduces human life to simple mathematics. Is saving him worth risking everyone else? This isn't a philosophical debate about the value of human dignity. This is cold arithmetic, where sentiment becomes a luxury that kills people, and the correct answer is usually no, you can't afford to help. Welcome to the moral bankruptcy department of ancient commerce, where your humanitarian instincts are a liability that threatens group survival. The goods that motivated these deadly journeys seem almost mundane today, but they represented wealth worth dying for in ancient economies. You're carrying salt that's literally worth its weight in gold in sub-Saharan markets, which sounds impressive until you realize that gold can't buy water that doesn't exist. The economic logic seemed sound back in civilization. Transport valuable commodities across a challenging but manageable desert, sell them for enormous profits, return home wealthy. The flaw in this business plan becomes apparent when people start dying, and you discover that dead merchants don't spend money. Salt, gold, and slaves drove this trade, but the human cost of transport often exceeded the value of the cargo itself. The salt you're transporting was mined by enslaved people and is being carried by merchants, who might not survive to sell it, creating a system where the commodity is worth more than the people handling it. This is capitalism in its most honest form, a business model where human life is just another overhead expense to be calculated and minimized. The slave trade adds another layer of horror that transforms your caravan into a mobile tragedy spanning continents. You're not just risking your own life for profit, you're forcing others to risk theirs for your economic benefit. The enslaved people in your caravan face the same deadly conditions you do, except they don't get to keep any profits if they survive. They're essentially unpaid participants in a suicide mission, which seems unfair even by ancient standards of workplace safety. Ivory, exotic animals, and precious metals seem glamorous until you're watching people die to transport them, and you start questioning whether any material goods are worth this level of human suffering. That beautiful ivory tusk becomes significantly less attractive when you realize it cost 3 human lives to get it this far, and you're not even halfway to your destination yet. The exotic animals you're transporting have better survival odds than you do, which raises uncomfortable questions about the intelligence of this entire enterprise. The economic pressure to continue becomes crushing when you realize that turning back means financial ruin, but continuing forward means probable death. You've invested everything in this journey, borrowed money you can't repay, and made promises to investors who expect returns. Failure isn't just personal disappointment. It's economic catastrophe that destroys families and ruins reputations. Success might kill you, but failure definitely will, just more slowly and with more paperwork. Caravan leaders make brutal triage decisions about who gets abandoned when supplies run low, and these decisions are based purely on economic value rather than human worth. The sick merchant who owns half the cargo gets water priority over the healthy servant who carries it. The valuable slave gets medical attention while the free porter gets left behind. These aren't evil people making cruel choices. They're desperate people making mathematical calculations where sentiment equals death. The goods that made merchants wealthy were literally paid for in human lives, creating a commerce system that treated death as an acceptable business expense. Historical records suggest mortality rates ranging from 10% to 80% depending on conditions, making this one of humanity's most dangerous regular commercial activities. The successful merchants weren't the bravest or most skilled. They were simply the ones who survived enough trips to accumulate wealth, like survivors of a deadly lottery that kept running draws. The Trans-Saharan Trade reveals the darkest aspects of human nature, where economic desperation transforms ordinary people into calculators of human expendability. You learn to evaluate people based on their survival probability rather than their personal qualities, to make decisions that prioritize profit over compassion, and to accept that commerce sometimes requires abandoning basic humanity. The desert doesn't make people evil. It just removes the luxury of pretending that economic systems don't run on human sacrifice. As your journey nears its end, assuming you're among the survivors, you begin to understand that the Sahara isn't just a desert. It's humanity's largest unmarked cemetery. The true legacy of trans-Saharan trade isn't the wealth it created, but the massive human cost that remains buried beneath the sand. Every successful crossing was built on the bones of previous failures, creating a transportation system that functioned as a slow-motion genocide with a decent profit margin for the lucky few who lived to collect it. The desert is littered with the remains of caravans that almost made it, water containers cracked and empty, trade goods scattered by wind and time, and human bones bleached white by sun and sand. These aren't romantic archaeological sites waiting for discovery. They're crime scenes where the criminal was geography, and the victims were people who thought they could negotiate with physics. The scattered remains tell stories of desperation, miscalculation, and the brutal moment when hope ran out, along with the water supply. You realize that your successful crossing doesn't represent triumph over the desert, but simply means you were lucky enough to add your footprints to the graveyard rather than your bones. The difference between survival and death often came down to factors completely outside your control. Whether that last oasis still had water, whether the bandits were feeling charitable that week, whether your guide actually knew where he was going or was just better at hiding his panic than you were at detecting it. The psychological toll of survival includes survivor's guilt, knowing that your success required the deaths of others who were just as deserving of life. The merchant who collapsed 3 days ago wasn't less worthy of survival. He just drew the short straw in the desert's brutal lottery system. The servant who died of dysentery didn't deserve his fate more than you deserved your luck. Survival creates a special kind of mental damage that comes from understanding exactly how arbitrary your continued existence really is. Historical mortality rates varied dramatically, with some accounts suggesting that between 10 and 80% of those attempting the crossing perished, making it one of the most dangerous commercial endeavors in history. This wasn't a business with acceptable losses. This was organized death with occasional survivors. The range in mortality statistics probably reflects different definitions of failure, because apparently there were multiple ways to measure how thoroughly the desert could destroy a commercial expedition. The wealth generated by successful crossings was literally built on mass casualties, creating economic systems that treated human death as an acceptable cost of doing business. The profits weren't just earned, they were paid for in advance with the lives of people who never lived to see the returns on their investment. This created a commerce model where success was measured not by efficiency or skill, but by how many people you were willing to sacrifice to transport luxury goods across a wasteland. The desert's environment made death almost inevitable. Without water, you begin to die within 8 hours, and the dryness prevents decomposition, making it what some called the land of fear. The lack of water and extreme heat turned every day into a relentless battle against cellular breakdown, where your body became your enemy and the environment offered no mercy for human weakness. The desert didn't discriminate. It killed the experienced and inexperienced with equal efficiency. Bandit attacks added another layer of mortality to an already lethal equation. These weren't romantic highwaymen seeking adventure. They were practical business people who recognized that robbing desperate travelers was easier than legitimate commerce. The constant threat meant that even if you survived thirst, disease, and navigation failures, you still had to worry about fellow humans who viewed your cargo as more valuable than your continued existence. The Sahara crossing reveals the brutal mathematics of ancient commerce, where human life was just another commodity to be calculated and expended. The successful merchants weren't heroes or adventurers. They were statistical outliers who survived enough crossings to accumulate wealth. The desert didn't care about your courage, your preparation, or your noble intentions. It evaluated everyone using the same simple criteria. Do you have enough water to reach the next source? And are you lucky enough to avoid the 100 things that can kill you along the way? Tonight, you've experienced the truth behind one of history's most romanticized forms of commerce. A truth measured in human bones rather than golden coins. The trans-Saharan slave trade alone forcibly transported an estimated 9 million enslaved people across this wasteland between 800 and 1,800, though the exact numbers remain uncertain given the scale and duration of these crossings. This created what amounts to humanity's largest graveyard with a profit margin. The next time you see a romanticized depiction of desert caravans gliding majestically across pristine dunes, remember that behind every successful trader were dozens who didn't make it back to tell their stories. Those flowing robes and colorful textiles weren't fashion statements. They were desperate attempts to prevent death by exposure. The desert didn't discriminate between the brave and the foolish, the experienced and the naive. It treated everyone with the same indifferent brutality, reducing human ambition to scattered remains beneath shifting sand. Sleep well, knowing that your greatest daily challenge probably doesn't involve calculating whether you have enough water to survive until tomorrow. The desert keeps its secrets well, but every grain of sand represents a story of human desperation, courage, and ultimately, expendability in the service of economic ambition. You know what's wild about the Silk Road? It wasn't actually about silk most of the time. Sure, Chinese silk was the luxury brand everyone wanted, but the real action was in things like salt, spices, and this is my favorite, specially trained pigeons that could navigate better than most humans. Tonight, we're spending the evening in a caravanserai, which is basically a medieval truck stop where exhausted merchants from Rome might find themselves sharing dinner with a Buddhist monk from India, while a Sogdian trader tries to sell them both some premium raisins that definitely fell off a camel yesterday. Welcome to the art of claiming your corner, because after weeks of desert travel, finding a place to sleep becomes medieval Tetris with cranky merchants as the pieces. Dusk approaches, and suddenly the horizon fills with dust clouds as dozens of caravans converge on this single fortified compound. Each group arrives with their own territorial instincts, cultural sleeping preferences, and a firm belief that their particular corner of expertise, whether it's Byzantine silk or Indian pepper, entitles them to the best spot in the courtyard. The Romans immediately avoid certain corners because they've heard rumors about barbarian sleeping customs that apparently involve too much communal snoring. The Sogdian traders, practical to their cores, stake out positions near their goods because leaving a fortune in saffron unguarded overnight strikes them as poor business planning. The animal stalls are deliberately separated from sleeping chambers, a design feature that keeps the worst odors and pests away from the merchants, though you can still catch hints of what's happening over there when the wind shifts. But here's where it gets interesting. These aren't random choices. Experienced travelers read the Caravanserai courtyard like a tactical map. Veterans knew the sweet spot, close enough to the well for water, but far enough from animals to avoid the 1-2 punch of dung and dawn braying. The architecture itself was designed with paranoia in mind. These fortified inns featured thick stone walls and a single entrance that could be barred shut at night, with the central courtyard functioning as both trading floor and defensive enclosure. The design wasn't accidental. These places needed to protect merchants and their valuable goods from the very real threat of bandits who weren't exactly known for their patience with locked doors. Each culture brings their own bedtime rituals to this chaos. The Chinese merchant carefully arranges his sleeping mat with mathematical precision, keeping his most valuable goods within arm's reach, and a small knife tucked discreetly under his pillow. The Persian trader spreads out what appears to be half a carpet shop, creating a nest so elaborate it makes everyone else's travel arrangements look like camping. The Buddhist monk, meanwhile, settles onto the bare ground with nothing but a thin blanket, either achieving spiritual enlightenment or hypothermia. It's hard to tell which. Then there's tonight's main challenge. A particularly territorial spice merchant who's claimed the same corner for 3 nights running. He's got his cardamom arranged in a defensive perimeter and shoots suspicious glances at anyone who ventures too close. Negotiating with him requires the diplomatic skills of an ambassador, and the patience of someone who really, really needs somewhere to sleep. You finally secure a decent patch of ground after offering to share your dried dates with the spice merchant's suspicious neighbor. It's not the premium real estate, but it's defensible, reasonably dry, and strategically positioned for the evening's next challenge. Trying to communicate with these fascinating, exhausted people when nobody speaks the same language. Ever tried to buy dinner when you speak Latin? The seller speaks Persian, and the cook apparently communicates entirely through suspicious glances and aggressive spoon-waving. Welcome to Silk Road customer service. The evening air fills with a symphony of linguistic chaos. A dozen languages mixing together like ingredients in a stew nobody ordered. You hear Chinese merchants haggling in rapid tones, Persian traders rolling their R's with theatrical flair, and Roman officials attempting to maintain dignity while clearly having no idea what anyone is saying. Punctuating this babble are the occasional sounds of successful transactions, the satisfied grunt of a deal completed, the clink of coins changing hands, and the universal sigh of someone who just realized they've been dramatically overcharged. The communication challenges reveal themselves immediately. How exactly do you negotiate the price of salt when expensive in Chinese sounds remarkably similar to excellent in Sogdian? Hand gestures seem like the obvious solution until you discover their meanings shift dramatically between cultures. The thumbs up that signals approval in one culture apparently questions someone's parentage in another. Fantastic. But here's where human ingenuity kicks in. By the 4th century, the Sogdian script and language served as a common tongue across the Silk Road. The Sogdian merchants become walking dictionaries, their linguistic skills making them invaluable as translators and dealmakers. They're the medieval equivalent of Google Translate, except they actually work and occasionally offer useful commentary about whether you're being swindled. Certain basics become universally understood through sheer necessity. Numbers translate through tactile counting. Merchants use knuckles and pebbles to communicate quantities when finger-counting systems vary between cultures. The concept of more or less gets communicated through increasingly dramatic gestures that would look like interpretive dance to an outside observer. The miscommunication disasters provide tonight's entertainment. There's the Roman merchant who gestured enthusiastically at what he thought was premium silk, only to discover he'd purchased an expensive bolt of cotton that cost him a week's profit. Yet the most fascinating transactions happen entirely without words. You watch a Persian carpet merchant spread his wares before a Chinese silk trader. Neither speaks the other's language, but both recognize quality craftsmanship when they see it. They communicate through touch, running fingers along fabric weave, testing thread strength, examining dye consistency. Their faces convey approval, concern, negotiation. The strategic arrangement of goods tells its own story. Premium items displayed prominently, lesser quality pieces tucked discreetly aside. The evening's most impressive moment unfolds as a multi-party trade negotiation conducted entirely through pointing, nodding, and the strategic sharing of food samples. Commerce, it turns out, really does find a way. The shared experiences of travel, exhaustion, and the universal desire for profit create understanding that transcends language barriers. But what exactly makes all this linguistic gymnastics worthwhile? The answer lies in the carefully guarded bundles these merchants clutch so protectively. Sure, everyone talks about silk, but let's be honest. The really interesting cargo was the stuff that made hardened merchants protective as mother bears. We're talking about goods so valuable that people would cross deserts and dodge bandits just to trade them. As evening settles, you witness the nightly inventory ritual. Merchants emerge from their travel-worn groups to check their most precious cargo, the items that justified months of dangerous travel and represent the entire reason these cultural crossroads exist. They unwrap bundles with the care of surgeons, counting and recounting goods that mean the difference between fortune and bankruptcy. Here's where it gets fascinating. The truly valuable items aren't always what you'd expect. Those trained pigeons we mentioned earlier, they command higher prices than jewelry because a bird that can navigate from Rome to Constantinople is worth more than gold to a merchant who needs to send messages home. The incredibly durable rope trade is apparently booming. Not exactly glamorous, but rope that won't snap in a sandstorm can save your entire caravan and cargo. Certain spices are literally worth more than their weight in gold, making saffron traders more paranoid than jewelers. The specialized knowledge required is staggering. A seasoned merchant can identify genuine saffron from turmeric-dyed fakes by scent alone, distinguishing between the metallic sweet aroma of real saffron and the earthier, less complex smell of counterfeit. Salt isn't just salt. Certain types from specific regions are considered medicinal miracles, capable of treating everything from digestive issues to skin conditions. The art of evaluating jade quality by flickering candlelight requires years of experience, running fingers over the stone's surface to detect the subtle variations in texture that separate valuable pieces from polished rocks. The trade encompasses far more than luxury items. Animal hides, wood, metalwork, grains, fruits, and vegetables all find their way along these routes. Exotic animals command premium prices, not just for their rarity, but for their practical applications. A well-trained hunting bird or a particularly sturdy pack animal represents a significant investment that pays dividends over years of use. Each item carries its own story. There's the Roman glassware that somehow survived 3 sandstorms, wrapped in layers of silk and cushioned with dried grass. The Chinese tea that supposedly grants longevity sits in ceramic containers sealed with wax, treated like liquid immortality. Indian steel that can supposedly cut through anything lies bundled in oiled leather, its reputation preceding it across continents. One merchant guards his mysterious cargo with particular intensity, something wrapped in multiple layers of silk and leather, valuable enough that he sleeps with one hand on it and pays extra for a premium corner spot. His nervous glances suggest it's either incredibly precious or incredibly illegal, possibly both. The human stories emerge as night deepens. That bolt of purple-dyed fabric represents a Byzantine merchant's entire family fortune, his children's inheritance wrapped in Tyrian purple that costs more than most people earn in a lifetime. The Sogdian trader treats his collection of premium raisins like crown jewels, because in his world, they essentially are. These dried grapes come from specific vines in specific valleys, their sweetness and preservation qualities making them currency in certain markets. Tonight's most successful trade unfolds as trained messenger pigeons exchange hands for a collection of rare spices. The transaction demonstrates how the most unusual goods often carry the most practical value. Communication networks matter as much as luxury items when you're thousands of miles from home. As these diverse goods, people, and cultures settle into evening routines, they create their own unique atmosphere in this ancient crossroads. If you've ever wondered what it sounds like when a dozen cultures try to cook dinner simultaneously while their camels provide unsolicited commentary, tonight's your lucky night. The evening air becomes thick with competing aromas that create what you might generously call a memorable scent profile. Chinese cooking spices mingle with Persian incense, Roman wine mingles with everything, and underneath it all lies the ever-present eau de camel, a fragrance that announces itself with confidence and refuses to leave. It's like someone took every interesting smell from 3 continents and decided they should all meet in one courtyard. Charming. The acoustic landscape develops its own personality as darkness settles. You hear multilingual arguments over cooking space, because apparently the concept of sharing the fire translates differently depending on whether you're from Rome or Samarkand. The rhythmic thud of goods being sorted and repacked provides a steady percussion, punctuated by the occasional musical entertainment from homesick travelers who've decided that tonight is the perfect time to practice their lute skills. The camels contribute their own reviews of the evening's activities through a series of grunts, snorts, and what can only be described as judgmental sighing. Flickering oil lamps cast dancing shadows across the courtyard, creating a visual chaos that somehow works. People move constantly, checking on animals, rearranging cargo, negotiating for better sleeping spots, and engaging in the eternal human ritual of trying to make temporary spaces feel less temporary. The careful arrangement of sleeping areas reveals itself as a form of architectural art, where every bedroll placement represents a small victory in spatial politics. The shared cooking areas operate under their own unspoken etiquette. Experienced travelers understand the protocols for borrowing fire or water without actually asking permission, which apparently involves a complex series of meaningful glances and strategic positioning of cooking pots. Certain corners become impromptu social gathering spots, though nobody seems to know exactly why. Perhaps it's the optimal combination of warmth, conversation, and distance from the camel situation. The initial chaos gradually organizes itself into something functional. Each group finds their rhythm within the larger community, like musicians in an orchestra that nobody's conducting but somehow manages to avoid complete disaster. The Roman merchant stops looking nervous about the barbarian cooking methods after realizing the results smell significantly better than his own dried rations. Unexpected moments of connection emerge as the evening progresses. A shared meal between strangers who can't speak each other's languages but can appreciate good food. A Roman merchant tentatively sampling Chinese tea and discovering it doesn't taste like punishment. The universal language of complaining about the weather, which apparently translates perfectly across all cultures and time periods. The cacophony transforms into something almost harmonious. Not quiet, but organized chaos where everyone has found their place for the night. It's not silence, but it's functional. The bonds that form between exhausted strangers sharing the same patch of dusty ground create something unexpectedly profound, even when nobody can understand a word anyone else is saying. The cast of evening characters reveals itself as darkness settles. The Sogdian merchants, those documented middlemen who dominated Central Asian trade, move through the courtyard with the practiced efficiency of people who've made this journey dozens of times. Their weathered faces suggest they've seen every possible disaster and lived to profit from the experience. The wide-eyed Roman on his first Eastern adventure keeps staring at everything like he's witnessing magic, which, considering his preconceptions about civilized society, he probably thinks he is. The Buddhist monk somehow maintains perfect serenity despite sleeping next to a camel that snores louder than a thunderstorm. Cultural friction points emerge immediately. Different concepts of personal space become apparent when the Roman realizes that his idea of adequate distance appears to be someone else's idea of antisocial behavior. Everyone engages in the delicate dance of respecting each other's customs while protecting their own interests, which mostly involves polite nodding and strategic positioning of personal belongings. The individual character studies develop as evening progresses. The Roman slowly learns that his preconceptions about barbarians might need revision after witnessing a Persian merchant demonstrate mathematical calculations that make Roman numerals look like cave paintings. Archaeological evidence shows Roman glassware and coins found their way into Han Dynasty tombs, proof that these cultural exchanges had lasting impact far beyond a single evening's conversation. The Chinese official tries desperately to maintain dignity while his silk robes collect enough dust to qualify as geological specimens. Evening wind-down rituals reveal cultural diversity in stark contrast. The Buddhist monk settles onto his simple mat with nothing but a thin blanket, either achieving spiritual enlightenment or hypothermia. It's hard to tell which. Meanwhile, the Persian trader spreads out what appears to be half a carpet shop, creating an elaborate divan arrangement that makes everyone else's travel accommodations look like camping. Natural leaders emerge without formal appointment. The practical caravan leader becomes the unofficial problem solver, mediating disputes over cooking space and sleeping arrangements with diplomatic skills that would impress ambassadors. Certain people gravitate toward each other despite cultural differences. drawn together by shared experiences, compatible temperaments, or mutual professional respect. These strangers create their own micro-society for one night, complete with unspoken rules, shared responsibilities, and the kind of temporary intimacy that only comes from mutual dependence. Everyone understands that tomorrow they'll separate and likely never meet again, which somehow makes tonight's connections more precious. As full darkness settles over the Caravanserai, this diverse group prepares for sleep, each carrying their own dreams of the journey ahead. But perhaps something deeper has taken root in this dusty courtyard than anyone expected. Here's the thing about these caravanserais. They weren't just medieval truck stops where people happened to crash for the night. They were the world's first truly global communities, where the future of human connection was being written one awkward, beautiful interaction at a time. Every gesture of shared food, every successful trade negotiation conducted through pointing and nodding, every moment when strangers helped each other despite speaking completely different languages. All of it was laying the groundwork for how cultures would interact for centuries to come. As our travelers drift off to sleep tonight, each dreaming in their own language but sharing the same hopes for safe passage and profitable trade, we see how the Silk Road's real cargo was always human understanding. The spices and silk were just the excuse. Every time cultures meet and find common ground despite their differences, they're continuing a tradition that started in dusty courtyards like this one, over 1,000 years ago.